Hey everybody, welcome back. Today, let's go over 3 tips to try and improve your listening skills from this guy. He is one of my favorite listening gurus. His name is Oscar Trimboli. He comes from Australia. And enough of that, let's get into it. So rather than me going on and explaining everything, I'm going to let Trimboli speak for himself. So let's listen to this first clip and figure out tip number 1. Why does tip number 1 help improve our listening?
Here's two really simple hacks to think about from your body's perspective. And the third tip is so practical, you're just going to hit your forehead. So tip number 1, in 1993 in Canada, and this research has been replicated in the US, Germany, and the Netherlands over decades since, the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen. And the science is really simple because it's such a cognitive load for your mind. Getting more oxygen to the brain helps you to listen better. There's less distraction.
Breathe, my friends. Breathe. So, write it down. Why does tip number 1 help us improve our listening? Let's hear a little bit more and think about the following metaphor printed on the screen above.
And I know you guys teach this and have had other brilliant guests on that talk to this much better. But it's a simple fact of holding your breath a little bit longer. So for me, it's not you taking and sitting down and moving into a yoga position before you start to listen to people. For me, it's as simple as from the time I step into a building lobby to the time I get to the lift, I become completely conscious of my breathing. And as a result, that starts to block out other distracting thoughts in my head. So tip number 1, the deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen. You only have to hold it for 5 seconds longer to help the brain create the rinse cycle that is the washing machine before listening.
I just love that metaphor. Create the rinse cycle that is the washing machine before listening. What does that mean to you? All right, let's get into tip number 2. As you listen to Trimboli talk about tip number 2, think about how can we implement tip number 2 in our daily lives, in our daily routines. So try to be specific when you consider this question.
The second tip is a hydrated brain is a more effective brain. So for a lot of us, we might start the morning with coffee, and that's great. Personally, I don't, but if you can drink 2 liters of water a day, your brain's going to be able to process more effectively because the fluids that transmit sugars to the brain get there quicker. So tip number 1, breathe deeper. Tip number 2, drink water. The final tip seems really obvious. It's so obvious that people don't do it. Announce to your guest that you are switching off your phone.
Okay, you got 2 tips for the price of 1. So think about the second tip that he introduced. Tip number 1, slow your breath. Tip number 2, glug glug. How can you implement that into your daily life? Write it down. So you briefly heard him say what tip number 3 is. So let's listen to Trimboli talk about tip number 3 and think about if you agree or disagree with his advice and why.
Announce to your guest that you are switching off your phone and put it in your bag or in your waistcoat pocket or wherever it needs to be. But by announcing that intention, straight away they go, I cannot believe that someone's going to do that for me. What an act of sheer generosity to give me your complete attention. Now, I challenge everybody who's listening right now. I challenge you to do that once a day for the next week and notice how different that conversation becomes. Because if you're really listening, what will be the opportunity for you to change your thinking because you're listening completely to the other person? So tip number 1, breathe deeply. Tip number 2, drink water. And tip number 3, announce and switch off, not vibrate mode, switch off your cell phone. And you will transform the kinds of conversations you have no matter who you're having them with.
I hope that you took a sip of water and had some deep breaths during this video. But now, think about the advice that he gives for number 3. Do you agree or disagree with this recommendation? Don't just think about whether or not it would be effective, but also if it would be practical. Do you agree or disagree? And why? All right, thank you for listening today. I hope that you found this interesting or useful, and I look forward to seeing you in class again soon. Until then, cheers!